weirdest things that happened to me last year was in a Slack channel. I contribute regularly to WordPress core, as in the WordPress open source project. And it was Eurovision weekend, which in our household is the happiest weekend of the year. So I was in a pretty good mood. And I'd opened up Slack, and there was a message for me in the WordPress Slack from one of the WordPress lead developers. Helen Husandi, who's one of the developers that I most admire in the world, had sent a message asking me to speak to me. And because the devil inside me tells me that I'm not a good developer, my first thought was to assume that I'd screwed up somehow and done something wrong. But I couldn't think what it was, but I nervously replied, basically trying to get everything out of the way so I could, as much as possible, enjoy Eurovision weekend. The message that came back was quite different. The message that came back was to invite me to become a guest committer for WordPress core. At home, this led to pandemonium. I started yelling out, sort of, "What the hell is happening?" kind of noises to my partner, who dared to answer me, so I, of course, turned around and told him to shut up. My inner monologue tells me that I'm not a good developer, but I was in a good mood, so pretty much on impulse, I agreed and decided to accept. And I mention this because I've always considered myself a front-end developer, and when I go for jobs, that's what I focus on. And by way of comparison, the people who contribute to WordPress write the software that powers a significant portion of the internet. You know, these thoughts of myself could be called imposter syndrome. This came several months after I was lucky enough to get a job at a company I admire called HumanMate, also hiring. And although in the hours leading up to it, I was so convinced that I was not going to get the job that I'd sent messages to at least 3 different people starting to arrange backup options. This too could be called imposter syndrome. Wikipedia defines imposter syndrome as a concept describing high-achieving individuals marked by an inability to internalise their accomplishments and a persistent fear of being exposed as a fraud, which is pretty dry, so I'm going to go with something a little bit more direct. Imposter syndrome is that internal voice telling you that you're shit at your job. And imposter syndrome is in no way a new problem. One of the American founding fathers would write to his wife frequently, questioning his fitness for the task at hand, his fitness to do his job. This is a biography for Ron Chenow's describing these letters. And I really like this quote for its directness. I think the key phrase here is the unspoken melancholy of the prodigy. Put another way, the more you know you don't know. The person being described was active in the 1780s, but their actions still influence our day-to-day lives today. What's his name? Alexander Hamilton. His name is Alexander Hamilton. 2 years after his father left he and his mother at age 10, he and his mother got sick. Alex got better, but his mother went quick. He moved in with a cousin, and the cousin committed suicide. So this is someone who has every reason to suffer from insecurities. And now, I'd argue that his greatest achievement was to go on and inspire Hamilton the musical. But he actually went on from this upbringing, this quite tragic upbringing, to become a decorated war vet and the first Treasury Secretary to President Washington. And for better or worse, the system that Alexander Hamilton and the other founding fathers developed still influences our day-to-day lives daily. And despite his own talent, he suffered the same fate as all of us, or many of us. In his darker moments, because he was surrounded by super talented people, he suffered imposter syndrome. And it's those dark places and the imposter syndrome that I want to talk about today. And the nature of these talks do require allowing you into the speaker's dark places. The nature of these talks require confessing to thoughts the speaker would rather keep to themselves. The nature of these talks require removing the veneer of confidence and allowing the self-doubt to shine. the nature of these talks requires something of you as an audience too. They ask you to acknowledge all that. And as an aside that's a little bit meta, I got a little bit worried writing this talk. I got quite nervous and was worried that I'd be able to fulfil my promise to deliver it. And I've delivered talks before, so basically I got imposter syndrome in the process of writing my talk on imposter syndrome. And there's a reason though that I asked you to acknowledge the nature of these talks, and it's the very reason I got nervous. Usually Peter Wilson, the self-confident character who's actually based on my life, presents these talks. But today, the real me is presenting with all my human flaws. Today, I'll be talking about imposter syndrome from the perspective of a developer. And for developers, there are an increasing number of tools to learn. New frameworks are always being developed, new tools being developed for existing languages, and it's the same for other professionals, I'm sure, be it writers, illustrators, marketing. And I'm sure it's the same in all industries. But I can only talk for myself as a developer. To my mind, though, web toxicity is a big contributor to imposter syndrome. A big part of the problem is the "you're not a real developer" meme. And what is so messed up is that it sometimes ends up pretty much trending on social media. And the sentiment might boil down to something like this: you're not a real developer if you can't develop without tools. Or you're not a real developer if you use some of the most common software in use today. Now, I chose these tweets because they were both quoting someone, presumably someone in a position of influence, so there is no need to hunt down the individual authors of these tweets. But even in my circles, in WordPress circles, the phrase "doing it wrong" has sort of become an almost celebrated insult. So much so that there's a function in there, right in the application, in the software itself. So much better would be a function actually named for what it means. So my reaction to be told that I'm doing it wrong or I'm not a real developer is to consider it hogwash. It's about as logical as claiming you're not a real developer unless you can optimize this JavaScript without converting it from its binary form. It's ridiculous. It's obviously CSS. But if you can open your editor of choice and write code that works as you intend, then you are a real developer. If you've set up your editor with tools to help making it easier for you, then you are a real developer. But more than that, you don't need the validation of randoms on Twitter to telling you what is or isn't your real job and whether you're good at it. So they're the thoughts I have when someone tries to tell me that I'm not a real developer. But that's not the bit that sticks. What the devil inside says is far more hurtful. You're not a good developer. I mentioned that during the introduction that these talks require removing the veneer of confidence, and so these are my thoughts without it. I can see that objectively I'm successful. It's just that one day my career is bound to come crashing down around me. And I've made this comment plenty of times before, and I sort of hinted at it at the start. I see myself as a front-end developer who knows enough back-end to be dangerous. It was never entirely true, but it is a self-effacing way of saying that I started as a front-end developer before becoming a back-end developer. What is entirely true is that I came to the web via the front end, and my first book on web development was HTML for Dummies first edition in 1995. What is also true is that I spend my working day with developers who have worked with good, honest, proper programming languages their entire lives. They most certainly didn't start with a Programming for Dummies book in the middle of the 1990s. Me, on the other hand, I can recreate the blink tag in 6 lines of CSS. But these days at work, I find myself writing more PHP than anything else. But I spend a lot of time on Google looking up the documentation. So my internal monologue loves to make a good joke about being endorsed for guest work on LinkedIn. Every now and then, one of the real developers will give me some good, honest CSS to sink my teeth into, because it's nice to have a proper front-end developer around when they're needed. My internal monologue rejoins that it's not worth wasting a real developer's time just to do the CSS. My inner monologue is a real bastard. Self-confident me tells the world that I love learning new things, especially when I make a newbie mistake and a code reviewer picks it up and just makes a comment without judgment. But the imposter me still thinks that I'm making a newbie mistake. So that's the kind of thinking that goes into my imposter syndrome, and I'm sure everyone's is a little bit different. And I'm not going to make anyone put up their hand, but I'm sure at least some of you saw a little bit of yourself in there. Which begs the question, how to manage imposter syndrome? Clear Left is one of the leading digital agencies globally, and they're leaders particularly when it comes to front-end development. And they have a really simple way of to encourage knowledge sharing within their office. It's a skills board. It's really simple. I can look at this board and see that if I have a question about responsive images, I can go to Mark. If I have a question about media queries in SVGs, I go to Charlotte. And I love the idea of this board for a lot of reasons. It's as smart as it is simplistic. The skills board says that there's an expectation of learning on the job. It says there are skills you need to do your job that you do not know yet. Go off, learn them, and jot a note on the skills boards when you've finished with your learning. The expectation of learning, though, is not the important bit. The important bit is the reverse of the coin, the expectation of ignorance. They're saying you have the ability to do this, you just don't know the messy details yet. And the logic behind development, or any job really, is the important bit. Never is it one particular detail. Looking at this board, I really like that it's held together with post-it notes and sticky tape. It's a lot like knowledge itself. One of the reasons I feel like an imposter is because I don't know things off the top of my head. I need to look it up. A while ago on Twitter, there was what I dubbed the "you're a real developer if" meme. Senior developers with loads of experience were posting their not-so-guilty secrets on the internet about how they work. A Google lead confessing to looking up how to get a string's length in Python every single time they need to do it. Or real developers acknowledging that they copy and paste things from Stack Overflow into their applications. I said that you don't need the validation of randoms on Twitter to tell you what is or isn't your job. However, when a bunch of people are sharing their experiences as being less than perfect, it's hard not to see a lesson in that. And remember that you yourself can be less than perfect at them too. My morning routine is to open my editor and then immediately open Dash for the documentation. It seems like that's just good practice, despite what my monologue is saying. So, what does this mean? How does this help manage the imposter? Knowing others work in the same way on its own doesn't help. You need to stamp down the inner monologue trying to undermine you. And how can you do this? If writing 3D transforms on a post-it notes to remind you that you know how to do something helps, do it. It might seem a little weird, especially if you work by yourself. So use a notebook instead. But the important thing is the list of things I can do. I use Twitter a lot, so I went through and favoured a bunch of these tweets to remind me that a lot of people are working in far less than perfect ways, just like I am. And by choosing to manage your inner monologue, manage imposter syndrome, it's possible that you won't feel like an imposter ever again. Now, that's a white lie. It's a 24-carat white gold lie, but those things are supposed to finish on a good note, which I'm going to try and do. I've decided that for me at least, there's probably no getting over imposter syndrome completely. And I expect the same is quite true for many people. So the best anyone can hope is to persevere with the veneer of confidence and build up techniques to help work around it. I hope you'll bear with me as I go back to my slightly latest obsession, Hamilton the musical. A good deal of the opening act is set during the American Revolution, the War of Independence. And you'll recall from the 2016 Tony Awards, I'm assuming that you were all watching, the battle at which the revolutionaries effectively won independence, both in fact and in fiction, was the Battle of Yorktown. And one of Hamilton's mates, Hercules Mulligan, infiltrates the British as a spy, and in the fictionalised version, he returns victorious at the Battle of Yorktown with this rap. See, that's what happens when you're up against the ruffians. We're in the shit now, somebody's got to shovel it. I'm Hercules Mulligan, I need no introduction. When you knock me down, I get the fuck back up again. For whatever reasons, some days, imposter syndrome is going to knock you down. The best advice that I can offer doesn't come on the day, it comes the day after. Be a ruffian, get the fuck back up again. Some days your inner monologue will make that hard to do, other days you'll be able to swap the self-doubt for self-confidence. But there's a problem with this advice. Just get up again. Just get up again. It's terrible, terrible, terrible advice. So I'm going to try and explain it. This time though, with a bit more about Hamilton. Although, this time Sam Hamilton from John Steinbeck's East of Eden. Sam is a tinkerer, which I think is something that a lot of us will be able to relate to. The web is full of tinkerers. And East of Eden is set in the first 20 years of last century. So instead of tinkering with computer tools and the like, he tinkers with the tools of the day, in particular farming equipment. Now, Sam has built some tools to make making wells easier, digging wells easier. And that's how he makes his living, digging wells for the other farmers. He's entirely self-taught, he's a tinkerer, and but not only does he know how to build the wells, he knows where to put them over the water, how to find the water to put the well over. And he knows how to find the water through the art of water divining, where a forked stick leads you to the water. When asked about the stick by his mate Adam, Sam responds, "Suppose a disbelief in myself forced me to do a magic to bring to the surface a thing I know how to do anyway." Does that make sense to you? Deciding to be a ruffian and push yourself up is the magic, the character you play, the trick to get over the self-doubt. It's the character I play on stage and sometimes in the office to bring back that self-confidence that I need to get through the day. Does that make sense to you? Doesn't make sense to me either. But thank you very much.